Now, since the Parkland, Florida shooting, the survivors have gotten a lot of attention, and the March for Our Lives has gotten a lot of attention, which is great. These are kids that are calling for common sense gun safety regulations. No, they don't want to ban guns. Anybody who's telling you that is trying to fearmonger you. You know, they've done actually a great job at pushing some of our legislatures to actually try to do something about this. But there are a group of students that feel somewhat left out. At a news conference, according to the Miami Herald, a group of students led by a 17-year-old Kai Koerber said that the increased law enforcement measures resulting from February's mass shooting left black students feeling as if they were treated like potential criminals. Now, they also say that they've been feeling left out of the entire gun debate surrounding, of course, the other Parkland students. Now, he said, Koerber told reporters, quote, "It's bad enough that we have to return to school with clear backpacks. Should we also return with our hands up?" Now, that is something that you don't hear in mainstream corporate media coverage of the Parkland students. Again, they've mainly featured David Hogg. Look, he's a great activist, and I've got a great quote from him later on, which supports these black students. And look, Emma Gonzalez is Latina, she is the LGBT community, but mainstream media has not really focused on the students of color. And so they're, of course, feeling left out of the conversation. And, of course, one of the parts of the conversation that they want to emphasize is police presence in the schools, which often turns out bad for African American students. Now, let me explain. First, Black Lives Matter organizer Tifanny Burks said, quote, "Of the students, they were shook. It felt like there was 1,000 police there. Having all those police there made their school feel like a prison." Now, why would they feel that way? Well, it turns out that more police in schools ends up detrimentally affecting African American students. In fact, according to a 2009 study by Matthew Theroux of the University of Tennessee, now he compared a student arrest and court records from one group of schools that had a school resource officer stationed on school grounds with those schools that didn't. Now, school resource officers is just another way of saying there is a armed police officer on the campus. Now, he found that students at police schools were much more likely to get arrested than schools at unpoliced schools. However, they weren't any more likely to actually be charged in court for weapons, drugs, alcohol, or assault. Now, in other words, students at police schools were much more likely to get arrested in cases where there wasn't enough evidence to actually charge them with any sort of crime, but they would get arrested anyway. And again, this would happen more in minority schools, which were, unfortunately, the types of schools that were more likely to get a school resource officer. Now, they also found that students at police schools were almost 5 times as likely to face criminal charges for something called disorderly conduct, which apparently, of course, did not rise to the level of an assault. In other words, when there was a police officer roaming the halls, students were much more likely to be arrested and brought into court for what they call disruptive behavior. So, now, that's not violent behavior. That's just being disruptive of the classroom. Oh, you're being disruptive. Guess what? I'm going to have to arrest you for disorderly conduct. That is another reason why we should not have police in schools. Now, as I mentioned before, SROs are more prevalent at schools that are poorer and more minority. So that leads to a sort of disproportionate situation where black students, minority students, are arrested more often than white students, and they end up, of course, getting hit with disorderly conduct. So that, of course, is part of the school-to-prison pipeline. Now, there's more. According to data published in a report by the U.S. Department of Education Office of Civil Rights, they found that black students are more than twice as likely to receive their discipline through law enforcement, despite composing a significantly smaller proportion of overall students. Now, they also said that punitive discipline referrals and arrests are increasingly being accredited for contributing to the school-to-prison pipeline, an issue that the American Bar Association deemed as, quote, one of our nation's most formidable challenges. Now, not just the criticism about school resource officers, there's other criticism as well. Other students that spoke at the rally questioned whether the national outrage that occurred after February's mass shooting would extend to the police-involved shootings of Stephon Clark, Alton Sterling, and Sandra Bland. Now, Clark, of course, was recently shot and killed in his own backyard while holding a cell phone. Oh, but he matched a description of somebody who was breaking windows, so he deserved to be executed because, well, I mean, it was dark and he had a cell phone and he's a black guy. He's dangerous. He must be dangerous, right? The police officers even cuffed the guy after he was dead. Disgusting. Now, Sandra Bland, of course, you remember her, she made the mistake of disrespecting a police officer and ended up in jail and then ended up dying in that jail. Not only that, but you also have Alton Sterling. Sterling, of course, and his name came up recently because the officer that killed him, the officers, I should say, they ended up walking. Now, of course, what happened with him is he was selling CDs outside a store. There were complaints. Oh, he's waving a gun around. And yes, Alton Sterling was armed, but at no point during the confrontation with police did he attempt to pull that gun. And that's according to an eyewitness inside the store that Alton Sterling was standing in front of. But it didn't matter because within 90 seconds, Alton Sterling was dead. And the police officer, according to videotape, had said, "I'm going to kill you, bitch." So, yes, these are conversations that absolutely need to be had. And the reason that it really connects to the situation when it comes to police and schools is that's the solution that a lot of lawmakers seem to be going towards. Let's put more cops in schools. Let's put more guns in schools. Well, when you do that, that's going to have a negative impact on minority students and on all students, but mostly minority students who tend to get disproportionately badly treated by these police officers. Now, local leaders responded to this, of course, by saying, we didn't intend to exclude black students. For example, you have Rosalind Osgood, who's a reverend, saying, quote, and she's a Broward County school board member. She says, like, well, I don't want the minority kids to be angry and feel like they're being ignored. I don't think anybody's intentionally excluding them, but nobody's intentionally including them either. And I think that's actually a really good point. Now, I mentioned David Hogg earlier. He's actually got a great quote on this. He talked to Axios recently, and he said that the media's biggest mistake, when he was asked, by the way, this was a question asked by Axios, that reporter saying, what do you think the media missed throughout their coverage of the entire protest and the March for Our Lives and everything? He said, the biggest mistake that the media has made is not giving African-American survivors a prominent voice. He said, quote, my school is about 25% black, but the way that we're covered doesn't reflect that. Now, Axios journalist and developer Alex Dooner added on Twitter that Hogg said the lack of black representation was, quote, disgusting. So he's saying, look, the media dropped the ball on this one. They did not represent African-American students, who are a fairly large part of the student body, 25%. They also need to be included. So here's David Hogg saying, we need to include these people as well, and maybe we should have a conversation on the impact that this has, that police officers have on school, and not only that, but the impact of police shootings, which is something that I've definitely wanted to see, and that's a situation that we definitely need to start having a major discussion on. So hopefully with that, the rest of the media starts to catch up and starts to actually have that conversation that has been sorely lacking in this press coverage. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.